it's not the same as, there are very large companies out there, multinational companies that are not franchises, and you would think that people working in those brands could have a shared culture that is rivaling of franchising, and maybe they do. However, the sense of ownership in franchising, I believe that kind of trumps everything else, because everyone knows what they're doing. They have their why. It may be a little different for each one of them, but there's a why behind the how.
Yes.
Welcome to the Franchise Hot Seat Podcast, where we talk about all things franchising. Now, here's your host, Dr. John P. Hayes.
Hi, it's John Hayes, Franchise Hot Seat Podcast, and my guest today, Madalina Iordache of Bright Pink Agency. And look at her, all dressed in pink. Always is, I believe. Different shades of pink, Madalina. But you're like a walking billboard for for Bright Pink Agency and for the companies that you represent, and for franchising, because you represent franchising so well. And thank you for being my guest, and thank you for supporting the Titus Center for Franchising.
Thank you, John. It's my pleasure to be here as a guest on your podcast today.
Thank you. So let's start with the tricky thing. How many people say, hello, Miss Iordache? They think that's an L instead of an I in your name. And where does your name come from? And that does kind of trick up some people.
Yeah, I like to keep things interesting, and start off on a difficult leg right there.
Yeah.
It's my last name and it's a Romanian name. Actually, it's a quite common Romanian name. And that's because that's where I was born and raised.
Yeah.
And you're right. Mostly everyone believes that's an L. And honestly, I don't mind if people mispronounce my last name. I understand it's difficult. But what irks me is that I would never write my last name with an L, like a typo, because I'm such a perfectionist and I care about spelling and all that. So that always irks me a little bit.
Well, people are careless, and we live in an age when everything is, the technology doesn't always help. And the speed that the technology invites and sometimes requires doesn't help either. But you then, did you come from Romania to the United States directly? And how did that happen, and why did that happen, before we get into some franchise things?
Oh gosh, it's been a long time. So yes, I came from Romania to the United States directly about 20 years ago. I was fresh out of college. I never really planned on that. It just how it happened. And full disclosure, I was chasing a boy. I was very young.
I'm shocked.
So I moved for love, not knowing much of anything really. I was, like I mentioned, a recent graduate from journalism school. I had a job in publishing, and I was in the midst of building a career as an artist, as a digital artist at a time. But at that age, it was easy to turn a new page and start something new. So I moved here with 2 suitcases and $200.
And did you catch the boy, or did you let him go?
I caught the boy. I married him.
Oh, wow. This is a real love story.
That marriage ended at some point, but
Okay.
it was still a good relationship.
Yeah.
And have 2 beautiful, amazing children as the result of that. So it was all worthwhile, and I wouldn't have it any other way, because
Good.
it truly was a transformative journey for me in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned so much along the way, because I had to rebuild my life from scratch here. I knew one person. I had zero networking, zero skills in business. I had my art skills and my communication skills, which I believe helped me a great deal in my career. And that's how I got here.
A degree in journalism, and my undergraduate degree is journalism, and my master's degree is journalism. And I think that's one of the best degrees to get, because it prepares you, not only as a writer, it prepares you to think, it prepares you to interview people, to interact with people, even people you don't like or people who you might be in awe of. It teaches you to write, of course. and it teaches you some business fundamentals as well, because if you're going to get published, you need to know how to do some things. So I think that the journalism degree, it's not as popular today, unfortunately, but it gives you a lot of options as a result of it. You can go in so many different directions. And so you finished your degree in Romania, is that correct?
Yes.
And then decided, I'm going to chase this fellow to the United States. Was he headed to Florida, to South Florida? Is that where you arrived?
He lived in Florida, yes.
Yeah. But what was it like in Romania at the time? Did you enjoy the education? You had family there. It's not difficult to pick. It's not easy to pick up and leave your home.
Great question. I think I had a great life in Romania. I grew up in a wonderful family with two younger sisters, and my parents, who thankfully they're still alive and they're thriving. And we were a very close-knit family. I went to school about an hour away from home, so I lived in the dorms, and I learned so much. I loved my experience in journalism school, and it was during that time that I started finding mentors, and didn't even know that was what I was doing, but I gravitated towards certain people who I've learned a lot from, and because of my interest in what I was learning from them, they took an interest in me. Yeah. So I kind of formed this informal mentor-mentee relationships, and that's how I chose what to write my thesis on. And I was quite flattered that my professor who supervised my thesis ended up teaching a class based on my thesis, because it was the only published material that was covering that topic, and it was something obscure, like the graphic layout of Romanian newspapers during that time, because newspapers were still a thing.
Yeah.
And then I also met the publisher of one of the biggest publishing labels in Romania at the time, book publishing, and he was teaching a class. And again, I took so much interest in that class that he actually hired me at the publishing house, and I was the first ever part-time job he's ever awarded. He never took part-timers before, but he made an exception for me, so I felt very special for that, and I learned so much there.
Yeah, and my goal was, if I could just be a columnist for a newspaper, that was my career goal. And thankfully, God saw another path that, no, there won't be any newspapers for you to write for. And secondly, you're never going to make more than $30 or $40 or $50,000, and it's going to be a struggle to provide for your family. And so God opened a door with franchising for me when I was 29 years old. But I want to know, and that changed my life totally. How about for you? When did you meet franchising, discover it, and how did that impact you?
It's funny to think back, because I can't tell you the exact moment when I met franchising. I started my company, Bright Pink Agency, in 2008, the crash of the economy.
Yeah.
Really fun times to be starting something new.
Right.
Everything was closing left and right, and I figured I'll jump ship from the business I was working for and build my own little boat, which is what I did. And it wasn't long after that we started working completely accidentally with a franchise brand, but I was not involved at all. It was all in development, and development as in coding, back-end stuff. And my sister, one of my younger sisters, is my business partner, and she's our engineer, she's our chief technology officer. She was the one doing all the communication on that project. So I had no idea that we were actually somehow indirectly working in franchising. It really wasn't until about, I want to say 2014, when I started working with Puro Clean, that I really discovered franchising. And I have to credit Steve White for my introduction to franchising.
One of the top people, the most admired people, hardworking people in franchising is Steve White. And fortunately, a member of the Titus Center Advisory Board as well. I'm very happy about that. So I'm glad you were working with him. He's kind of your introduction then to franchising. Yes,
he became so much more than that. He became, again, an informal mentor, because I was curious and I asked a lot of questions. And beyond that, Puro Clean could have easily been just one more company we worked with, just like all the other non-franchise brands. But by getting more involved in their business, learning about the different aspects of it, and especially by attending their annual convention, I got to experience the culture of franchising and the community it formed. And that was something I lacked very much. Being a small business owner in my own world, I wasn't networking, I wasn't doing a lot of things, I wasn't part of marketing associations or anything like that. And franchising offered to me sort of a family, a community, a place to belong, something driven by bigger goals than just run a business, make some money, feed your family, something like that. So that's really what made it so attractive, and it gave my work a lot more meaning than it had before.
People often comment about the culture or the soul of franchising and personifying franchising, which is easy to do. And I've been in franchising since 1979, so I've seen lots of different experiences. I've been on the inside of many different companies, including the companies in franchising that I ran. And you mentioned the word family. One of my earliest experiences was the Dwyer family. Don Dwyer, a pioneer in franchising, started a carpet cleaning franchise in Waco, Texas in 1980, and then grew that into multiple different businesses under the Dwyer Group. Today, that little company that Don Dwyer launched is known as Neighborly, the world's largest provider of home service brands in franchising. I was so fortunate to be part of the Dwyer experience. And I noticed that the Dwyer business was not only different because it was a franchise, but it was different from other franchises that I was working for, where maybe the owner, the founder, the CEO was more driven by goals, money, success, results, number of franchisees. And not that Don wasn't driven by all of that, but Don also recognized, and particularly his children, when they succeeded him, because Don died very early at 60, unfortunately, but he had this group of 6 children, most of whom were involved in the business. And because of the way Don and his wife raised those children, they knew to build culture. They knew to build family before they built business. And they put that ahead of financial results, even though it was a publicly traded company at the time Don died, and I was very fortunate to be a member of the board of directors. And there was that struggle with, do we make a decision that will satisfy Wall Street, or do we make a decision that will satisfy our franchisees and build our familial franchise relationship? Those were hard decisions to make, because when you're in the public eye and your stock makes a difference, and fortunately we never allowed that. Rarely ever was that the case. The board, which led the family, but the family really laid out the groundwork and the ideas. They embraced, let's do what's right for our franchisees, and that paid off. They created a culture. Those conventions were not meetings as much as they were family experiences. So Puro Clean has something similar, and you then discovered that.
I did, and it was contagious, and I wanted to be part of that. First of all, it helped me understand them better at a deeper level, so I could provide better services to them. We work with them not just on, we've built their website and maintained their website, which serves all their franchisees, but we work with their franchisees as well. So we got to understand them and what's the best way to help them so they can be successful at the local level. And again, understanding how franchising, what that journey is of a franchisee from the beginning, when they're a lead in the pipeline of franchise development, all the way when they're like, okay, congratulations, you're a business owner now, what do you do? And seeing how that first year is challenging, regardless of what they hear during the sales period, or regardless of the success of the brand, it's always challenging.
Absolutely.
And playing a part in making their work easier, at least on the marketing side, which, I say at least, but it is a vital part of any business. Marketing is the fuel. It fuels sales, and without sales, you don't have a business. So to me, that was understanding that it helped me be a better service provider to my clients. And it made me realize that there's so much more beyond that to discover, to understand, and to be of service to. And it was Steve again who encouraged me to foray a little deeper into franchising. Okay, Puro Clean is great, but you really should look into other brands. You could do this for others. And I was skeptical at first. I really thought, Puro Clean is special, and they really are.
Yes.
They built something extraordinary, and I credit Steve for that, and they credit Steve for that. So I've gotten to know the owners and many people in that network. But he nudged me to join the IFA and go to a convention and see what things are there. So because he nudged me, so I figured if I don't listen to the man, he will never give me any advice ever again. So I'll go. I'll tell him I tried it. I didn't like it. So thank you very much.
No.
Sure enough, that was not the case.
No.
Joined the IFA in 2021, and I never looked back.
No.
I really went all in, attended every possible meeting, convention, conference, connected with everyone who could teach me more, read every book. I ordered probably 20 books on franchising that I could get my hands on, interviewed countless people so I could really absorb as much as possible from the franchise world.
Yeah, and then it seeps into your own company, the way you build your family within your company. And it also just, you can't help but represent yourself in a different way, even to your real family at home. Things changed in my life once I discovered franchising. I think one of the first exciting points about franchising for me was seeing the people who were like me, or I might be a little further ahead than them, but they were becoming franchisees, and then watching them over a period of 4 or 5 years become multi-unit franchisees, sometimes multi-brand franchisees, because Dwyer had 3, 4, 5 different brands that were available to franchisees. And to see how people blossomed into something so much more than what they were, like being a teacher, which I love being a teacher, but it doesn't always pay very well. Usually it doesn't. Or being a newspaper columnist, which I thought was the end-all be-all, but franchising provided so much more. And I would see that happen with people, and I would hear, well, so-and-so's doing $100,000 a year. When I was a college professor at $12,500 a year. I was a college professor. Didn't that stand for something? And this fellow, in another case, he was there was actually a newspaper franchise, a business newspaper franchise long ago that came out of Atlanta. You could buy a territory and you published a newspaper for businesses, business to business newspaper. And they did all the printing for you. You just had to sell the advertising. They would even write all the articles. You could write your front page articles if you wanted to localize it for Miami or whatever area you were in. And I helped that company early on and saw that these people who were selling the advertising for a newspaper in their area were doing $100,000 a year. The same with couponing. We have many like Money Mailer, but before Money Mailer was Trimark, and that was my client. And their franchisees would own West Palm Beach and go out and sell coupons that would go in envelopes that would go to 30,000 homes in the territory. And the more times they had envelopes going out, the more money they were making, and they were 6-figure incomes. And all they were doing was going door to door and selling advertising packages. I thought, wow, a college professor could do that. So it opened my eyes, because people think, Puro Clean, what is Puro Clean? What do they even do? Never heard of that. Or Sinorama, never heard of that. Transworld Business Advisors, what are those businesses? And what does it have to do with franchising? Because people think, oh, you mean Chick-fil-A, McDonald's, Pizza Hut. Yeah, we mean that, but that's not all we mean. And a lot of people have this idea franchising is out of their reach. but I'm sure you learn differently.
It's so within reach. And I've also seen those stories which were so powerful from people who were perhaps a technician in a franchise, and then from there grew to either buy the business from their boss or open their own business and then bring their friends in to buy in neighboring territories. And those are great uplifting stories. Or people who came from nothing, immigrated, didn't know anyone here, and then they became franchisee of the year within 2 years because they just worked harder than anyone and followed the path that was charted ahead. And I think that's one of the things that I admire so much about franchising, and I believe in it. As a small business owner myself, I know how hard it is to build a business. And had I known how hard it would be, I would have never started.
Yeah.
I would not have started. And I'm not saying it's easy for franchisees when it's also hard for them. They also have to hustle, and it's not as easy as a 9 to 5. You work way harder, but they have a blueprint, they have guidance, and they have a community of others like them and their support system. And that's what makes it so much better, a better way to start a business. So to me, that was like, oh gosh, you could do this with guidance and a support system. It's fantastic. But beyond that, I picked up a lot of things, and this shows how much this ripples out outside of just the franchise system and the people that it directly impact, like the franchisees. The culture, core values, and how you live those out, and how you inspire those who work with you. Franchising does this very well. They have to have culture pretty much built into the fabric of their brand. Otherwise, they're not going to be successful.
Yeah.
And you know, culture, whether you think you have it or you don't think you have it, you still have it.
Yeah, right.
It's
like personality. You may think it's a great personality, but the people around you don't think it's so great.
Exactly. So it wasn't until I witnessed franchising from that supplier seat that I understood the importance of building a meaningful, intentional culture. So it doesn't just happen. And we have brought in core values, and we have brought in just more intentional way of doing things and standard operating procedures. Do you think I knew what those were back when I started at 20 something in 2008? I had no idea. Franchising does that incredibly well. In fact, that's foundational in franchising.
Yeah.
If you don't have those, you can't teach someone how to run it locally. So that was another important lesson that probably I could have learned in business school, but I didn't go to business school. My business school was learning by observing what great franchise brands do very well.
Me too. I don't have a business degree, and in spite of this, the business world has been where I've worked for the last 40 years almost. Why is it, do you think, that the heart, the soul, the culture of franchising, other businesses don't appear to have that same kind of cultural leadership or the heart and the soul? It's not that in franchising you have to be a cheerleader necessarily, but cheerleaders are welcome because people need to be encouraged, but encouragement alone wouldn't be enough. How much of the culture is the reason for the success of businesses in franchising? And do you see that same experience happening in non-franchise businesses?
I really don't see it happen outside. And I do have the occasional excursion outside of franchising. I do go to some other events outside of that, and it's not there. And I really think it's because outside of franchising, companies are more competitive, more guarded, whereas in franchising, there's a lot of sharing of information. Even there's competitors within the franchise space.
Yeah.
Sometimes people may think even neighboring franchisees could be looked at as competitors, and I'm sure some do. But I think what makes it different is the sense of ownership and shared success that happens in franchising. And you don't get that in the association of marketing professionals or the association of, something else. They have shared experiences, and that brings people together. It makes them realize they're not alone. Yes, they may be struggling with something. They have not just the support system of their brand, but the support system of each other. Mm-hmm. Being part of the same cohort they graduated with, or going to the regional meetings, going to convention, having impact groups where they come together to troubleshoot specific issues in their companies. I think that is extremely important, and without that, it can get quite lonely, and you may feel like nobody understands what you're going through. And I, as someone who's not a franchisee or not in a franchise company, I see that, and I have to, be a lot more intentional about making sure that I get that same type of mind share that franchisees can get built into their system, because it's obviously not built into my business model. And I do that through being part of masterminds and stuff like that, boards. But franchising has a unique advantage there, which is by design, but that's why it makes it so successful. That correlated with the sense of ownership, because it's not the same as, there are very large companies out there, multinational companies that are not franchises, and you would think that people working in those brands could have a shared culture that is rivaling of franchising, and maybe they do. However, the sense of ownership in franchising, I believe that kind of trumps everything else, because everyone knows what they're doing. They have their why. It may be a little different for each one of them, but there is a why behind the how.
Yes, such a good point. Understanding why you're doing whatever you're doing, and good franchise companies help you discover that early on. It was one of the things that Don Dwyer talked about even before he sold a franchise to anyone. Why? Why would I believe that you could do this, and therefore I should invite you to become my franchisee? Why do you want to do this? The big why is very important in franchising, and I've seen that as you've seen it play out. I think it's also this advantage that if you and I are both Puro Clean franchisees, for example, and we made a very smart decision about joining a company like Puro Clean, but you're in Fort Lauderdale and I'm in Cleveland, Ohio, we're not direct competitors. We represent the same brand and we sell the same services and products, but we have different territories. Therefore, I have no hesitancy about talking to you about what I have done that made me $1 million the fastest, and encourage you and help you to do the very same thing in your market, or you helping me. Franchisees have no hesitancy, and that builds more than a business relationship, which you can get out of being in masterminds, and you can get out of being like at the Titus Center Advisory Board. But that franchise, it's like a marriage. We're cousins, at least. If franchisor and franchisee are considered spouses, then we are the offspring. We're cousins in franchising. We want to help one another. And it's impossible not in those kind of relationships not to get to know about the other person and care about the other person. And so that's magical in franchising, and I don't see it happening in corporate America.
No, and I've talked to many people who basically said the same thing, that they go to whatever they're in, hospitality or a specific industry, they go to those events and they do not get the same community that they get within franchising. And that happens across brands too.
Yes.
So, but yeah, even in neighboring territories, an interesting thing I've noticed again with Puro Clean, because I've worked with them the longest. We have many other brands that we work with, but because they were the first ones we gotten involved with 11 years ago or so now, I've noticed even in neighboring territories, they help each other. Say a new one opens up, before they have any jobs, they go and help someone else on their job so they can learn hands-on. So or they call each other, hey, I have a huge job, come help me, and we'll split the proceeds for here. So it's really a fantastic model for that. Of course, the territories have to be mindfully allocated and distributed, so there's no rivalry happening.
Right.
I'm sure it does happen because we're humans, but overall, it's designed to cause collaboration, not friction.
So I'm often surprised by the critics of franchising. This is fresh on my mind because in my MBA course last night at Palm Beach Atlantic University, I was teaching about the negatives and the criticisms and the critics of franchising. And perhaps the biggest objection other than money. But when people say, well, it costs too much money, well, is it free or less money to start a business that's not a franchise? No. And it's more likely that that business you start that's not a franchise will not exist within 2 or 3 years. That's the data that we have in this country. It's the data that they have in the United Kingdom. It's the data that they have in many other countries where I've taught the independent entrepreneurial business. The business that you, Madalina, launched, as you say, very, very difficult, and most of them will not survive. But in franchising, depending on the brand, most of them will survive, and you can also determine those that not only survive, but make a lot of money. So if you take the money issue out of franchising, then people will say, well, I don't have any control as a franchisee, and that's what I would object to. And I always say, drop to your knees and thank God that you're not in control. Because if you were in control, you would be making decisions that are going to lose you money at least some of the time, if not most of the time. And that's why businesses fail. Because the people, it's not the lack of money. When you've spent $400,000 out of your savings to try to start a business that failed, Fred DeLuca started Subway with $1,000 and built the world's largest network of franchises. How is it possible that you would spend $400,000 and lose it all? Oh, there's a good reason why. You didn't know what to do, when to do it, how much of it to do, when to do it all over again, because you didn't have a plan. Franchisees have plans, systems. Yes, they're rigid. Yes, you've got to do what Puro Clean tells you to do, because Puro Clean has already tested it, spent the money that you won't have to lose to tell you this is the way to do it to make money. But people will this is the big criticism, that no, you don't have any creativity as a franchisee. And I know creativity is important to people, but these...
A hobby.
Yeah, a hobby, exactly. It shouldn't be in your business. Why do you want to experiment with your business? So how often do you run into critics of franchising, and or is that not commonplace in what you're doing?
Probably not as often as you do. Most of the people outside of franchising that I speak to, they don't understand franchising all that well. They're more from the group of, McDonald's.
Yes.
And they're surprised to learn that it goes into every industry possible. I think people who have this criticism don't fully understand how franchising works. And of course, there's good franchising and bad franchising, as in any area of life. But those who say there's no creativity, perhaps they shouldn't be in franchising.
Yeah, exactly.
Perhaps there's room in this world for true entrepreneurship, which means come up with something of your own from scratch and do something out of that. There's never been a better time to be alive for entrepreneurs like today. Franchising is for those who want to do it with a script. That's why you want to have the logo and the script for how to run that business, then buy into it and pay that fee, because it's well worth it for getting a tested recipe. You don't have to, you still make your own mistakes, but you don't have to make all of the mistakes that all the trial and error. There's trial and error in anything. Every entrepreneur who succeeded building something, they probably failed many times before. And you don't have to go through that. That's the price of admission. It saves you sanity. You can use that, put that energy towards following that, and there's always room for some creativity. You just have to be strategic about it. Don't start suggesting changes when you're brand new in the system. I'm sure that a couple years in, when you've learned how it's done, and businesses evolve all the time, including franchise businesses. A business in 5 years is not gonna, look at now. I don't even know what the world's gonna look like in 5 years from now. In 10 years, it's probably gonna be unrecognizable. And it's been proven that oftentimes it's the franchisees who bring to their franchisors ideas for new products, new ways of doing things. So that's proof that there is room for creativity that comes from the franchisees. And franchisors want that feedback, but not from someone who's not willing to try the way it's been done so far and just goes in there to change everything. We've had that happen with a new hire, bright girl out of college, but she came in and week one wanted to change everything. And I had to sit her down and explain, I'm open to ideas. I welcome ideas, but I don't feel like you've tried to understand how we do things and why we do it this way. And even if you have, you really haven't given it, it's been a week. It's impossible that you get how we do it and why we do it. And once you've done that, then come to me and say, hey, let's do it better this way.
Well, Ray Titus as a franchisor is one of the best and one that I have heard say to his franchisees, just give us a year. Follow our system. After all, you're investing a lot of money, maybe $200,000 to $500,000, maybe $1 million in his big Venture X office sharing projects. If you're investing, whatever it is you're investing, you want to protect it. And our system will protect it if you will work the system. So let's make a deal. Work the system the way we spell it out for you, the way we train you and coach you and support you. Work the system for 1 year. And let's see where you are at the end of that year. And then if you have some suggestions on how we should change our advertising or our marketing or whatever it is we may be doing, we will be happy to listen to your suggestions and recommendations, because our franchisees do bring us great ideas, which we then incorporate into our system. But just to change it in the first 90 days, because you've come from a marketing background and you think we should be using TikTok and not using other platforms, or putting more money into Instagram than we are into other forms of media, we've already tested all of that. We've spent the money ahead of you to figure it out. So please do it our way for a year. You'll protect yourself. You'll be in business at the end of the year, and then you can make some decisions. I think that's very reasonable. Reasonable people don't always get into franchising, but I think that's very reasonable, a way to look at it.
And I think it's a matter of setting expectations. And I think Ray says that like right from the beginning.
Yeah.
Don't wait till the problem comes up and anticipate that these ideas are going to come, and set those expectations from the beginning, from training, from before training, so you can know so the franchisee knows when to start suggesting changes or not. Yeah. Probably more often than not, they realize that it does work and it works for a reason. And I think there's always room for that local flavor, right? And I'm not talking, about food here, but oftentimes, especially with service businesses, you have to adapt what you do to that specific territory, because perhaps the business started in the Midwest and then you're going to open shop in New York or on the East Coast somewhere, and it's not the same demographic.
Right.
And it's different from somewhere very downtown versus somewhat a little more suburban. It's a different demographic. And I think the franchisors expect their franchisees to know their audience best, because they are there, boots on the ground in their community, and know how to sell to that audience better. And that's where it's beneficiary to add some of that local flavor, some nuances, come forth to your franchisor and say, okay, so this is the first time you're opening shop on the West Coast, and let's see how do we adapt this concept, not where it's a complete departure from where it started, but make it more local to the point where the customers feel like they're doing business with the local business, because that's really what everyone wants to feel these days, right? Like
absolutely
national brand with local flavor.
Yes. Which reminds me of another hero of mine in franchising. Bill Rosenberg was the founder of Dunkin' Brands. He was in his 80s by the time I joined the IFA, and I was fortunate in that he really didn't have much to do because his son Robert was running Dunkin' at the time. But Bill was like the Colonel Sanders, a walking billboard at IFA. You wanted, if you knew who that was, you wanted to get his ear, and fortunately he had time to let you have lunch with him or breakfast or spend time with him. And he was very, very kind to me in giving me advice. And one of the things that as a pioneer in the 1950s in franchising with Dunkin', he said very early on, what I love about this is that I give ordinary, average, everyday, not necessarily wealthy people the opportunity through Dunkin' to chase the American dream. And that feeling, which has been tested over and over and over, and we know it's true, you don't have to be a millionaire. You don't have to have hundreds of thousands of dollars even to become a franchisee and represent a business that you actually will love and become part of a culture. Bill created that opportunity in franchising and was probably the first person to say it that way, that this is giving opportunity to people who otherwise won't get opportunity. You get that in franchising. And I think that's something for us when we work in franchising, that there's that added benefit. It's not just about the financial reward.
It's really not. That's what it is. It's the opportunity for someone of average skills, average intelligence, average means to create something extraordinary.
Yeah. Well, we're out of time, Madalina, but I certainly have enjoyed our conversation, and I think it'll be helpful to a lot of people. I appreciate you taking the time to do it. I know how busy it is when you run an agency and you've got lots of people looking for you and asking for you and needing you to do things, but it's all worth it because you do work in this great community of franchising. You attract people. I see it at the Titus Center Advisory Board. People want to know what you're thinking, what you're saying, and they want you to participate with them in so many things that help build franchising. So congratulations to you for doing all of that, for being who you are, for inspiring other people, particularly my students who love these opportunities that they get through Titus Center and through franchising. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hayes. This type of conversations, yes, I have to press pause on the daily business, but they are so energizing for me. It really reminds me, takes me back to the why we do what we do. And
Exactly.
we all need that reminder, especially when we're caught up in the daily grind and business has its ups and downs, but reflecting on this is always an opportunity to get some of that energy back and bring that back into my community.
Well, thank you again.
Thanks for tuning in to the Franchise Hot Seat Podcast with Dr. John P. Hayes. Tune in next time for more conversation around all things franchising.